It's for real.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Nostalgia Crackdown here on the Let's Get Ready Network. I'm Adelia. That's my buddy Josh. We are slightly delayed. Thank you for being patient with us. And we are here to talk about the faction system in seasons 7, 8, and 9. Josh, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing okay. I'm excited to talk about the faction system. We both have fond memories of that, and there's a lot. I think there's a lot to talk about for sure.
Absolutely. So, Josh, how about we start off with why we liked the faction system?
Absolutely. So I think me and you have a unique perspective in this because we both are big sports fans. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes.
We love sports. So when the Schmoedown was shifting towards a more sports focus, that makes perfect sense for both of us. And we know the inherent investment of sports. And I think that's really the key word, investment. You get so invested in these teams, the dungeon, swag, corruption. And I think it also helped that a lot of these factions, I think, were really home runs. There were very few misses, in my opinion, when it came to factions. They were clear, like, oh, it's so easy to root for this team because of X or Y or Z. And it attracted all these different types of fans. And the same reason you get invested for your hometown team. For example, I'm a Knicks fan. I'm invested in the Knicks. We're having a great season. So when your team's doing great or on your future success, you choose a team and you can become invested in it. And what's great about the Schmoedown is each team had its own flavor. Like that's sort of true in sports, but not really. So there's just such a clear investment in the factions and the point system, and there's so much discussion about the point system, and it almost felt like almost a sports show. And when people were talking about it, whether it was the after shows or backstage, a lot of discussion on who's going to end up on top. Oh, this is a huge game for corruption to win if they want to win the faction war, or the tournaments are coming up. Well, this team needs a great tournament run. There's just a lot inherent discussion that comes from sports and the investment within a sports team, and that's why I personally really love the faction system and love watching those faction matches.
I would completely agree with all of that. I think that the faction system, having the sports aspects that it had, also made fan engagement with the Schmoedown go through the roof. I mean, I know it was the switch to the faction system that led to me starting to tweet about it and getting more involved in the Schmoedown community and ending up being part of LGR. So this is also when we had the rise of a lot of after shows. Sure, there were after shows and podcasts and stuff before that, but this really was a time where it felt like everyone that knew about the Schmoedown was talking about the Schmoedown. People were tuning in live for the premieres of the matches. The chat was really active. The chats on the after shows was really active. The competitors were going around doing interviews. Like none of that existed before the faction system. And I understand that to a point, COVID also played its role in people being at home and being available on a Friday night to come on our Schmoedown Crackdown show or whatever. But it also showed the passion that everybody had, that even though they were at home, what they were choosing to do was engage with the Schmoedown.
Absolutely. And it felt like what it added was investment to every single match, even if the match wasn't super important. Because let's say there was a meaningless match that had nothing to do with the title game or whatever. It was just a rookie showcase or something. That instantly becomes at least somewhat important because your team has the ability to win points in a way. So it just for a baseline, even if you're not invested in the story like other people are, and I was invested in the story, but let's say you're someone who enjoy the sport of it more than the investment. That gave all the sports fans or the people who leaned more on the sports side an ability for every single match to be like, oh, I'm excited to see the outcome just for the faction result.
Yeah. And I think that at this time too, because of COVID, we lost a lot of the skits and the storyline elements that was part of it. But I feel like the matches themselves then became the storylines and the tension and the drama that the matches were creating provided so much more for us to talk about than maybe if there had been a normal studio match with a really good cut scene at the end of it.
Absolutely, and I'll quickly say, I think also, I know we didn't get a lot of it because of the digital, and we're going to talk about how the digital effect on storylines and the faction effect on storylines and the difference between the two. But I actually think the factions added to storylines in a lot of different ways. We all remember the famous moment in the first Schmoedown draft when John Rocco went forth and he had that big speech and that drama
Yep.
created within the Finstock exchange. I think the first year of the Finstock exchange is a great showcase of why Dynasty is great for sports. And there was so much talk about that. This overstacked team that was like everyone thought was going to win it all and stuff like that. You had what I think I'll use the current sports as an example. For us, the Super Bowl hasn't happened yet. I don't know when this is getting posted yet, but we
Tomorrow.
have. Oh, awesome! So the Super Bowl is still going to be relevant going in the Super Bowl, we have a great story, almost a wrestling like storyline. We have the dominant dynasty Chiefs, even on an off year, making the Super Bowl with maybe the greatest of all time and the greatest coach and all this stuff. And then on the other side, you have Kyle Shanahan trying to overcome his inability to win one Super Bowl. You have Mr. Irrelevant versus the most talented quarterback we've ever seen at the position. I think inherently sports adds to storyline, even if there's no control over it. There were so many, I think, moments within the faction system where because there wasn't cutscenes, the faction system almost held up the storylines in a way, and I think it's more of my maybe hot take is the faction system adds to storylines more than it takes away.
I would agree with that. I mean, you had inter-faction storylines, you had factions warring with other factions and storylines with that, and it was all based not on a scripted cutscene to further something, but was going on with the actual gameplay, which is how I preferred most of the storylines, to be honest. So we also, one of my favorite things about the faction system is because of the tension and everything, we got some of the best matches in the faction era.
Absolutely.
We got two 5150 matches that are incredible, especially that Star Wars match. I was never more invested in Star Wars matches than I was in the faction era, and when it was going on, the tension, and I've watched the Star Wars movies several times. I can hold a conversation about Star Wars. I could not answer one of those questions, but that made it more impressive to me. I know that a lot of people, I've heard some people say that turned them off of Star Wars because, like, if they can't guess along with the game, then they weren't having as much fun. And I can understand that point. But for me, it became more um, something that I wanted to watch and tune in and everything. And then in the 5150 match between Damon and Dimolanta, when we had the call that Damon was the winner, and then Dimolanta saying, "No, I have to challenge," and then we go back for more questions, and it just the inherent drama of all of that just drew me into the Schmoedown even more.
It felt like something almost like, like in football, like the Des catch not catch type of thing, where it's like a
Mm-hmm.
crucial replay that changes it. Even this season, the Kadarius Tony foot offsides play that had the Chiefs lose that regular season game. I think there's a bit of that, and I also think what it says too is because of the faction system, you had these group of people that were all working together, and at least on the top, the good factions, it would felt like a sports team where it's like you're training with each other, you're trying to get each other better. It's like even though there's not really teamwork, even in teams, there's only two, but even it felt like the whole faction was behind each match, and it felt
Yeah.
like. At least to me, that increased the stakes, increased my investment in it. It increased a lot of stuff, and like I think there's so much good to be had with the faction system. As I said, we're both biased on this because we're both sports fans, and the reason why I'm
Mm-hmm.
using so many sports metaphors is because the faction system is inherently sports based. But I never felt like it got to the point where we lost the other part of the Schmoedown. Maybe a little at the end, and we'll talk about that. But I think in general, like you had all the great things that made the Schmoedown, and not just a pure sport, but also every single advantage that sports get, why people love sports and why people get invested in sports.
Absolutely. Now, before we move on to what some of the faults with the faction system were, let's hear from our buddy Justin on how you can help support the channel.
Hey guys, it's Justin, aka Hambone, just here to let you know a couple of things that we have going on with the channel. One, we have a Patreon. If you can and want to support us, you can do that. As little as $1. You can join the Discord. We also have a merch store where you can get some cool shirts, mugs, and stuff with all of our different shows and labels on there. And thank you for all of our supporters that have already been there with us.
And that's patreon.com/LGR_network if you're interested in helping support the channel. And while you're here, why don't you go ahead and subscribe, click that notification bell, and you'll know when we upload more stuff to the channel. All right, Josh, let's talk about some of the things about the faction system that we didn't necessarily like.
Absolutely. So I think the biggest thing, I think the fault within the faction system, in my opinion, was the lack of a good system from one year to the next year when it came to free agency and the draft. Because like I think what makes sports so great is that you have mostly the same year team. There's a I'm forgetting the word for it, but there's a
Continuity.
yes, absolutely. There's a continuity, but there's also got to be like it can't be 100% continuity. There's got to be some changes. And I remember this moment exactly because the Finstock Exchange just had the Bateman versus Merle match. And everyone was talking about how the Finstock Exchange, even though it was a close race, people ever said, well, Finstock Exchange is going to win. They have Bateman, Merle, they have the champion, they have Barbarian who looks really good. There's this talk that like this team is too busted and then we need a way to break it up. And I remember this was my first ever Schmoedown post online where I said, that is absolutely the wrong idea. We cannot have a full redraft because we need continuity. And also dynasties like the Finstock Exchange are that type of dynasty is actually good for the Schmoedown long term, number one. And number two, they haven't won the thing yet. So I was like, we're having this theoretical conversation about the Finstock Exchange running away with it, and Swag and Corruption were like right on their tail at the moment. And it was like, we were like, oh man, this is too uncompetitive. It honestly was a way too long post. It was a extremely long post, but like I think the biggest problem, because we did end up having a redraft. I think it was really shortly announced afterwards we had a redraft, and I think what a sports team need is you need to have the core team mostly stay the same unless they're not winning, and then you need to have the bottom of the team stay the same because you want them to like if they're spending time on a prospect or something or a newer player, and let's say they get one match and they lose, you don't want that new player now that has to be on a new situation and like, what? Wait, I like them when they were on the dungeon, but they're immediately on a new team type of thing. You had to like shake up the middle, if you will, like have the top four stay the same, and then like 7 to 10 or something, or 8 to 10 stay the same, and then 5, 6, 7 basically change every year. And that also prevents super teams because you have your top four, but after you're not going to have a fifth best player or whatever. But it's one of those things where it's a tough system to create. And I had a couple ideas, but like in general, it's one of those things where it's like it's tough because the Schmoedown's not one of those things where players are bound by contracts. It's not one of those things where this is their full-time career. There's no general managers. Um, there's no incentive even for the managers to be like, well, I like coaching this player, so why would I get rid of them type of thing. It
Yeah.
was it's a difficult situation where it's like because sports are so reliant on the pressure to win and also the pressure to change and to like develop in this way, and Schmoedown just didn't have that pressure, which in some ways were good and probably for a more healthier environment. But for the entertainment and for the long-term health, you need to be able to have enough continuity and enough changeover. And it felt like the Shimano never had that balance. It was either way too much change or not enough change. And for the most part, it's way too much change because we had a whole redraft after 1 year, which I still drives me nuts.
Yeah.
Because again, I truly, yeah.
Yeah. I remember watching that spectacular in season 7, and Adam Collins wins the championship, and Christian says, okay, Shannon gets to keep 3 players from her team, and then everybody else is a free agent. And I went, what? Like, you can't do that. You can't just break up this team completely. Like, allow for some change, of course, but you can't just do that. And then, so Shannon picked her 3 players who I think were Mike, Chance, and Adam. And then we went into the draft, not the draft, the free agency period, going, well, how is Shannon going to get Marisol back? And the way they staged the free agency thing was Marisol's the last person to come on. Everybody else has chosen their things. The only person's left is Kate, so she has to go to the Den. And I thought, okay, well, that would be interesting if they keep Marisol in the Den. What happens? Kate promptly trades Marisol back to Shannon for draft picks, and we do the redraft. And I enjoyed a lot of the new players that came into the league in season 8 through that draft, but I was kind of like, so the team I just got all invested in doesn't exist anymore? I mean, yeah, the faction does, but the team of the players that I was invested in, I didn't think that there would be such complete change. Now, some players ended up on the same factions that they had the year before through free agency or the draft, and others moved. But like, I don't agree and didn't then and still don't, that you just changed everything and redrafted everyone, because that lessened my investment a little bit at the beginning of season 8.
It definitely was weird because I think corruption winning, it was kind of heartbreaking almost, just because like what's great, I'm going to use sports again as an example. What's great about great teams and what turns them into dynasties is see if they can do it after more than 1 year.
Yeah.
And I think dynasties are inherently good for sports. It's why I'm not mad about the Chiefs at all. In fact, I'm almost rooting for them just for this. I am going to be rooting for the Chiefs in the Super Bowl just to be like, man, Mahomes is so great. Reed is so great. I just want to see them keep winning and because we might disagree on that one, but
I'm a Broncos fan. I can't root for the Chiefs.
That's fair. That's fair. That's fair. But it's one of those things where dynasties in general, I think, is good for sports. And I think a system that's almost too fair, where no one can build a dynasty, it has its own fault in a way. And the other thing I want to quickly say is the issue with continuity is it destroyed, in my opinion, or not destroyed, but did irreplaceable damage to the team's division.
Yeah.
Because you couldn't, like, other than the top teams, you couldn't have teams that start off maybe on a bad year and then come back, or teams that were middling and then almost, or even a team like, even this is the second year, this was at the end of the faction system, but Liz Shannon Miller and Ethan Irwin, all these teams, there were so many teams that I would be so interested in to see if they got more matches. And in the end, it was just like, so many teams were just like, well, the new faction system, we can't really keep them together in this way. So it made the teams division very top heavy, and they never had a good system for teams to stay together throughout the faction system.
Yeah, I agree with that. Going into that first year of the faction system, we had the top 5 ranked teams stay together. And so if you drafted one member of that team, you had to draft automatically the other member of that team. And that kept a little bit of continuity, but we'd already just gone through the anarchy stuff, which just, turned the team's division upside down and gave us all these new teams. And then we had only 5 teams from that getting to stay together. And then it was a bunch of new teams. And then the next season, it was like, okay, well, you like that person? Well, they're on a different faction now than their teammate. So that team's no more. And it's a bunch of new teams. It really did change the way I viewed the teams division, which was one of my favorite divisions. I love Shazam. I love the Looney Bin. The Looney Bin being broken up is still heartbreaking to me.
There's a part of me. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and we never got them to get back together because of situations. So go ahead.
I was just going to quickly say that part of an unaffected consequence of part of the reason why this was so devastating is the family was one of those protected teams.
Mm-hmm.
And the family, Drew McWeeny retired 1 game into the season. So you had like 5 protected teams, and one of them was immediately broken up. And I don't blame Drew at all for this, but also there's a part of me that's also like, if Drew retires before the season, the Looney Bin stays together. They're the 5th protected team. It was just like, also, it was also weird because like Drew McWeeny was the number 1 pick. So the number 1, it would be like if Caleb Williams against the projected number 1 pick for the NFL, if he entered the league and after 1 game retired.
Yeah.
it would be insane in a way, and like so like that also had that also had a huge impact on the continuity of teams as well, I think. But it's definitely tough. It's a tough situation. I'm not even sure we have answers to this, just because of
Oh no,
how
I don't
unique of
have
an
any
entity the
answers.
Schmoedown is. Absolutely, but I don't know. It's just tough. And the other thing I think is, I think the league just needed the faction system needed. It was very competitive, but I think there were moments where it's like it felt like there was no incentive if you weren't in the hunt for first. Well,
Mhm.
it didn't. I mean, fifth. There's no difference between fifth and fourth and sixth or anything
Yeah,
like that. It was like if you were out of it at a certain point, which it's a general sports problem as well. But I felt that was especially difficult within the Schmoedown, where the like there's no there's no, and this is good in a way in some ways, but there's no cutthroatness in a way where it's like, listen, we're not winning, we need to make some changes. A team you could be completely theoretically, a manager can be like, no, I just like this team, I don't care that we don't win, and just do that for like 2 or 3 seasons. I think that's inherently a flaw, because like if I'm a fan of that team and my manager is just like, oh, we're not winning, but I just like these people, it's like I don't know, it's something where I think that could have also been, but in some moments, but this is more nitpicky, but some moments kind of showed itself to be slightly a problem, mostly in like tournament picking and not choosing like the most like best players for a tournament, but players who didn't have a chance and that type of thing. Like that, I
yeah,
felt I felt like that kind of took away the fun almost in it, at least as a fan. And again, that's maybe me being selfish or stuff like that. And maybe that makes for a healthier league, the manager dynamic. But I think entertainment wise, that does take a hit when you're like, oh, I wonder. Okay, so this team's obviously going to choose these four for a tournament and these four for a tournament, and then you're like, oh, they just chose this person because they didn't get a lot of matches. In some ways, that's inherently, I think, disappointing for a fan.
yeah, I would agree with that. I think another thing is that because managers liked the people that were on their team, we didn't necessarily see trades really utilized as much as they could have been. I know we had a few trades in the season 7 that we had the big Ethan Irwin trade to get Ethan Irwin on the usual suspects. There was a trade of draft picks there, and then because the Burning Droogs were disbanded after season 7, I remember them just giving Sam his draft picks back. And I was like, why? Like,
This is, I mean, Sam Levine, just it's the steal of the century. So you're just getting Ethan Irwin for free.
yeah.
That was crazy for sure. And it's I think that trade was made even before we knew what the draft was going to be. So
Hmm.
I think the whole point was like, all right, for 2 draft picks, and we were like, okay, so there's going to be a draft now. We know, I think probably. So it was. There's definitely a bit of that as well, because also we didn't know how important the draft would be. I would argue if the faction system continued over 2 seasons, after seeing how important rookies played in a part in season 2 with the Finstock exchange, I wouldn't be surprised if season 3 and season 4 we got a lot. Assuming the same structure keeps the same, I wouldn't be surprised if we had a lot more draft pick trades, because we now have a clear proven sign of like, hey, if you build up a lot of draft picks, you can still have a huge amount of success and almost win the faction title or be in the running for the faction title with the Finstock exchange.
Yeah, I agree. So, anything else we need to cover in this section, Josh?
I think we got almost everything. Those were my major faults, but again, those are more nitpicky and just more like some are nitpicky, some aren't. But like it's definitely like I enjoyed more than I disliked when it came to the faction system. And those were just the small changes where in any system where we only got 2 years of it, I think the faction system would have evolved, and some of those changes and some of those faults would have been fixed after like a couple of years. But every league takes a couple of years to kind of figure out the kinks, even in sports.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about why the faction system ended. This, I think, had a lot to do with the digital era and Harloff wanting to move away from the digital era. Um, but I personally didn't like season 9 at all. So I would have preferred the faction system to stay. I think the faction system happening in person in a studio would have worked a lot better than what we got with Friday Night Titans. Because we still had factions, but there were no points, there was no incentive. It was basically the factions were back to their original purpose in the Schmoedown, which was for storylines, and it sort of took all the fun out of it for me. What about you?
I still enjoy season 9 in its moments, but I was kind of bummed out when the faction system turned out to be, oh, we're not doing it anymore. I think a lot of the faction system's perceived faults are just digital era faults that just got pushed on because they just happened to be at the same time. Like the idea of
Yeah.
like, I think the talk was like, well, Christian couldn't really control the storylines or whatever because of the factions and like not having control. It can't force a manager to do something. And like, there's two things I think about that. Number one, I think we had storyline. I don't believe storylines was a faction problem. I believe that was a digital era problem. I think there's so many sports alone. We have so many different kind of like stories and storylines that just come from sports that aren't scripted that I feel like the faction system had, and I feel like there was so much potential with storylines with the faction system that just weren't utilized because like the digital era. Like I remember the time when we stopped doing the storylines. We had the Finstock exchange having this legendary rookie run. We had corruption looking to get a second chip in the row, second season title win in a row. You had Swag, who had a lot of expectations and a lot of like, oh, this is going to be a dynasty or like a team that's always going to be competing, having a really off year and having a very difficult year in the faction system. The Mercs rise, and Cohen maybe being manager of the year and that type of stuff. There's just natural things you can play off of within the success and the unscriptedness of that. And I don't think that's a faction problem. I think a lot of it was just a digital age problem and like the problem of the restrictions of not only the faction stuff, which there are some restrictions, but also combined with the restrictions inherently due to the digital age. Number one, and I still think we had good storyline moments within the faction system. Chandru, most of his like turn and his kind of like turn into one of the best characters with heels within the Schmoedown came within the faction system.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of that where I think the story, a lot of the digital stuff gets blamed on the faction system. And the other thing with it is, sorry, I actually lost my train of thought, but I'll just Delia, what do you think of that, the digital versus the faction system?
I think you're right about that. I think that there were obvious reasons to be frustrated with aspects of the digital era. I mean, not being able to be in person to film a match the way that you had filmed a match before caused a lot of things to change, and they had to adapt and figure out ways that things would look on screen and how you do teams and all kinds of stuff. But I think the fact that the faction system gets blamed for storylines not and the digital era even getting blamed for storylines not existing is just not right. Because they proved with the First Class League that you could do storylines in a digital format. Because they did all kinds of storylines in the First Class League that I thought some of them were better than others, but they were at least giving it a try. I think that the digital era, I understand how a lot of people were just like, okay, I just want to get to a point where I can hang out with my friends again, like we used to, and cheer on competitors that we're watching do a match in a studio. I think that if they had maybe gone back to the way the studio matches were before having kept the faction system, I would have enjoyed season 9 a lot more than the everything's in 2 hours. We're not going to tell you what's on the show until you watch the show and stuff like that. Really took away anticipation, and the storylines that were being done seemed so random and out of nowhere because you just have someone come in at the end of the episode to challenge someone for next week and you'd have no idea why, and then it was supposed to make sense. So I think a lot of the storyline stuff is just misplaced why it didn't work, because I think that there were just attempts were made to make it work at the start of season 8. They'd get in, StreamYards or Zooms or whatever and film people like talking back and forth before a match the following week, and that'd be a cutscene the week prior, and then that just stopped.
Yeah, and I also the other problem I'll say, and I remembered it as you were talking, is continuity. Is you had if you're gonna go into the sports direction, you have to stick with it, in my opinion. And the fact that it was just a 180 to a 180 to a 90 to a 180, that's not, you don't have enough continuity, I think, to like
Yeah.
for so it was one of those things where that's why part of the reason why I think season 9 failed is because you had this continuity you were building with the first 2 faction systems, and then it's just a complete 180. It's like, no, actually, we're going back to what it was before, when you already did the work to get fans invested into the faction system, and especially because the factions that people fell in love with drastically changed in season 9. So, and I think the other issue with why the faction system ended is Schmoedown did survive after COVID, but it wasn't thriving, and they definitely needed. There was pressure to have like a big year, and the faction system, within the 2 years, even though we loved it, I think there was a lot of worrying signs of viewership or like merch sale wise, where it's like the point I was like, listen, if we don't have a big year, we're probably canceled. So let's go back to what we know, the bread and butter, and let's it was like, listen, what we were doing the past 2 years didn't work, so we just need to change it up, or else we might get canceled. We can't keep saying the same road, and I think that was part of the reasoning why the faction systems ended up ending, is because there was such a pressure on the season 9 to be like, well, listen, if we don't do well in this season, we're done.
Yeah, and I think they changed it too much because they didn't go back to what had worked before. They changed it completely and tried to combine the factions with the studio, but make it a TV show. And I don't know.
It
really
was
don't
like
like season 9.
it was a lot of change, but also trying to go back, but like not copy the previous season. It's like, no, it's actually its own season and it's different and it has all these new changes, but it is a back to the previous non-faction era and the non-digital age, and trying to just distance itself from the COVID era season. And I I think that like I think that like there were some good ideas, but they needed to be adjusted. I think you're completely right about the anticipation, the whole surprise. Oh, we don't know what matches are next week. You just have to tune in to find out. That type of thing, I think, complete swing and a miss. Like I think
Yeah.
that's maybe the biggest I would say biggest flaw of season 9 by far.
That's like taking something that had been a sport for 2 years and then saying, buy tickets to this date and you'll show up and see what teams are playing.
I know it's like, yeah, it could be Patrick Mahomes playing, or it could be Chad Henne. I mean, you got to give Chad Henne a chance, or it could be, listen, it could be the Knicks versus the Bucks, with Giannis, or it could be the Knicks versus the Pistons, the like largest losing league. And maybe these examples are a tiny bit unkind, but like it definitely deviated so much from the sports aspect. And I don't know, I'm not a wrestling person, but I think even wrestling has a bunch of like the wrestling
Wrestling
fans know.
definitely advertises what matches are going to be the next week, the week before.
It almost felt like it was they tried to take a model of like a telenovela or like a TV show or like a soap
Yeah.
opera, and that just wasn't. That was out of all the things the Schmoedown was. It wasn't a TV. It sort of is a TV show, but it's more of a sport than it
Yeah.
is a TV show.
Yeah. And I think part of my problem with season 9 too is that the directions that a lot of them went in didn't get me interested in tuning in the next week.
Yeah, I think, I think for sure. Yeah, I think there's a lot of problems with season 9. There's still a lot of moments I love from it, and like
There are some good moments for
there's
sure.
some good moments, but I completely agree that there were, there were a lot of huge swings. There was season 9, weirdly, despite going back to what they know and what worked, it wasn't playing it safe in a lot of ways. They were taking a lot of risks, and the problem
Yeah.
is when you take a lot of risks and only, let's say, let's say 50% or 25% paid off. Let's say around that, somewhere within that range. The ones that miss are much more damaging than the ones that hit, because the reason why it's a risk is that if it fails or if something doesn't go exactly right, then it's the damage is bad. It's risky. So I completely get that. But ending back, trying to circle back in the end to the faction system, I think the faction system had its faults, but it's something where I think it comes back down to continuity. I think in the end, some of the biggest
Mhm.
problems with the Schmoedown within this time, whether it's season 9, whether it's the faction system, is continuity, and not the idea that, like, hey, let's just kind of stick through this, and I think we're going to be okay. And if we need to change some stuff up, we will, but we can't change too much up. We need a specific amount of continuity in the league, and I think this happens with sports leagues as well. Leagues are even changing their rules even now. I would use the NBA as an example. They just implemented a new rule where you can't be MVP if you don't play 65 games because of the whole stars resting situation. Sports
Mhm.
leagues change and adapt and that type of stuff, but they can't change too much. You can't have a redraft if you're the NBA or the
Imagine just imagine if Adam Silver walked out to a press conference tomorrow and said, "Yeah, next year we're just going to redraft the whole league." People would
or not
lose
redraft
their
the whole league, but
minds.
redraft. You could keep 4 players,
Yeah.
even if it's just
You
four
can keep
players.
3 of your starters and we'll redraft the rest of the league.
It's something where it's like, again, it's the Schmoedown's not in an easy position because they have no
No, it's
free
not.
agency, they have no
Yeah.
contracts, they have no way to like naturally have enough change to make each league exciting.
Yeah.
However, you definitely needed, I think, more continuity than just 3 people, especially after the first year. And I also think I will always say that I truly believe this in my heart is that part of the reason there was such a huge change after year 1 was the Finstock exchange scare. It was
Yeah.
this scare that, like, the Finstock exchange is too powerful and they will win all the leagues. And I think if you told Christian after the Bayman versus Morel match, hey, I'm from the future, corruption actually wins the league, I don't think he has that big redraft. I
I
think
yeah.
or and you tell him the Finstock exchange actually is not even close to second. It was a swag versus corruption in the end. I think if you tell him that you're like, hey, the Finstock exchange isn't going to dominate the way you think. You still are going to have enough parity with it. It's not going to be like, oh well, Finstock exchange is obviously way too powerful. If I think you tell them that, I think we would have a different drafting system, or we might even just be like, hey, same teams and you could add rookies or something. I wouldn't be surprised, because I think a lot of that initial redraft, I could be wrong, I could be this is me speculating, I truly believe that comes from the Finstock exchange and the fear of just like unbeatable dynasty after that Bayman versus Merle match.
Yeah, I think you might be right about that. Anything else you want to add, Josh?
No, as I said, we're both biased sports fans, so like that might also taint
Yeah.
our perspective. I'm sure there's some more wrestling slash storyline fans that maybe didn't view this time as much because it was skewed towards the sports a bit more, especially that second year. Although I argue the second year, it's not the faction system's fault that they skewed more towards the sports rather than the storyline, but I think this is a love letter to sports in a way, and why I always thought the Schmoedown was a great sport is because there's so much investment and continuity and just great things that get a fan just hooked on sports in a very unique way, almost different than any other entertainment. Even I know sports sometimes get compared to like MCU fans and that type of stuff. I think sports is its own unique type of fandom that is very tough to replicate. And the Schmoedown did almost honestly a great job of it. And looking back on that, it's incredible to see. And I truly I will always look back fondly on the faction system, even despite its flaws and despite the COVID times we were living during it.
Absolutely. So let us know in the comments what your thoughts on the faction system were. Do you miss it? Do you wish it had continued into season 9? Did you like season 9 and the changes? Let us know in the comments below. Josh, where can people find you?
They can find me here at LGR. I'm doing the Nostalgia Crackdown. We'll probably be doing one a month. I'm any way you support LGR is the same way as supporting me. They got a great channel. They got a lot of great videos, and the Patreon's a great deal. Just for $1, you can join the Discord and hang out with the community. So, best deal in the market.
Thank you, Josh. You can find me on this channel every Thursday, 3 p.m. Pacific, on the Rewatchers Council, our Buffy the Vampire Slayer rewatch series. Every Friday, 8 p.m. Pacific, with Ferris Muthana on the Open Table, our long-form discussion, dinner party-esque kind of conversation where we don't actually eat dinner and it's just talk about whatever we feel like. And on the sports channel, the Highlights channel, 3 p.m. Pacific every Tuesday for the starting 11 with Snark talking about the English Premier League. And currently at 3 p.m. Thursdays on the Highlights channel as well, Ferris and I talking about the Six Nations rugby tournament on the Schmoedown. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and we will see you all next month.
It's for real.